Coming to you from my kitchen for a quick and dirty video about this camera, the Canon EOS R6 Mark II. This is like the third time this year that I've rented it, and every time that I rent this, I say, well, I've got to make a review video about that, because even though this is a phenomenal, fairly uncompromised, and almost perfect workhorse of a camera, there are a few like nitpicky things that are the reason that I've always rented it and not buy it. Maybe there are things that make it not the right camera for like 5% of photographers and videographers. So let's have a quick look at the R6 Mark II before I ship it off. Okay, if you're not familiar with the R6 Mark II, it is a full frame 24.2 megapixel CMOS sensor behind an RF mount in a body similar to the R6 Mark I body. So a mid-level full frame body. So what differentiates this from the Canon EOS R8, which has the same sensor and most of the same imaging and video specs, are a more robust weather shield body. In fact, if you watch my review of the R8, you'll see that the weather sealing did present me with something of a problem. You've also got dual card slots, UHS Type 2 SD, as well as 3 control dials, some other professional video buttons. And it also takes the larger Canon LPE6NH batteries that are used in Canon's other full-frame mirrorless cameras. But what piqued my interest so much when this came out was not, the professional features that it has above an entry-level camera. It's the improvements that it boasts over the Mark I version of the EOS R6. So I also have some review content about that camera, which I found to be extremely frustrating when putting it to regular work, because it was basically like the guts of a 1DX Mark III DSLR crammed into a little mirrorless camera body. It presented a lot of problems such as overheating, poor battery life, and even sometimes locking up. But for me, the unforgivable sin of the original R6 was that it was in so many ways worse, especially for the type of photography that I do, landscapes and studio photography, worse than the camera that it ostensibly replaced, the EOS R Classic, as I sometimes call it. So that camera had a 30 megapixel sensor that resolved more print detail in tests that I ran than the 20 megapixel sensor in the original R6. Tie all that around an annoying 30-minute recording limit, and the R6 it wasn't the camera for me. So I was excited when Canon announced the R6 Mark II to see that they had fixed all of those issues. The 24 megapixel sensor I did test to have more detail than the 30 megapixel sensor in the EOS R at ISO 400 and above, because of its very good high ISO noise performance, and to have equivalent detail at the ISOs below 400. We're also scrapping Canon's obnoxious 30-minute recording limit and introducing incredible improvements in silicon efficiency for the sensor, and probably as well for the imaging processor, to deliver very good battery life, reduced rolling shutter, nice reliability, and up to 40 frames per second shooting with the electronic shutter. That's fantastic. Nevertheless, this is a camera that I find very few people discuss in online conversation, and my theory is that all those improvements are too fantastic. There's not really a way to build a controvertible thesis or to make a hot take about this camera. It's essentially perfect. So let me tell you why I think this is probably the perfect camera for you. If you work in weddings, events, or photojournalism, this camera is incredible. It has an absolutely top-notch, basically, in my experience, never miss autofocus system. It shoots, like I said, 40 frames per second with the electronic shutter. Still manages to crank out 12 frames per second, I believe, with the mechanical shutter. And it has incredible low light performance. If you shoot that type of material in a hybrid capacity, photos and videos, this camera has a dedicated photo-video switch, so that's great. I'm a little annoyed that it's on the left-hand side of the camera, so I can see if you were like shooting an event with a 70-200, you're probably going to stabilize the shot with your left hand and then reach around to switch from photo to video with your right hand, so that's a little annoying. I wish they'd use the implementation from the R7 with one switch on the right hand side that just goes off stills video. But however, this is still a huge improvement from the previous version of the camera where you had to go into the menu to switch from photo to video. This is pretty quick. Where I think this camera really shines for those purposes is with the 24 megapixel sensor, because to get an improvement from what this camera offers, you basically have to buy into a 45 or higher megapixel sensor, and I'd hate to be thinking of being a wedding photographer coming home with thousands of images to warehouse, to store, and to catalog with all those images being, 75 megabytes apiece. I also think 24 megapixels is really great for video applications. You can pull raw video out of this with an external recorder, and in that instance, you're getting a 6K raw video as opposed to something more bloated and unnecessary for those purposes like an 8K video. In addition to that, you're getting all these really cool pro features, dual card slots, great battery life, the in-body image stabilization, something I didn't even have a chance to touch on, right? This camera is just the full professional complement for those purposes. And sort of to my mind, those are the more demanding or challenging types of photography. And so if this camera can handle that, it can definitely handle your kid's birthday party, your corporate event, right? Whatever purpose you have for a camera, this camera is rock solid and ready to go. There's almost nothing this camera can't do. Almost. So if I was a betting man and I had to bet which camera was right for you, I'd probably put my money on this camera. It's a pretty safe bet. But there are a few things that I think you should know about that make it not the perfect camera for some situations. One of those is dynamic range in video. So this camera has good video quality, very excellent video quality. In fact, it's got oversampled 4K video that is oversampled from 6K down to 4K in all of its 4K frame rates, all the way up to 60 frames per second, and with no crop in 4K 60 and no restrictions on record time, right? That's not just good, that's really good. That's class leading, in fact. However, and this is the nut that I think Canon has got to crack in their next generation of mirrorless hybrid cameras, the dynamic range of the video is not great. In fact, there are several lower priced full frame cameras from other manufacturers that both offer fuller dynamic range from the sensors and record in a fuller dynamic range gamma. So in this camera, you can record in the C-Log 3 gamma, and I don't think you're going to be finding that the dynamic range capabilities of the sensor are stressing that gamma. So in fact, this has basically indistinguishable dynamic range from my crop sensor Canon R7 and less dynamic range than my Super 35mm C200 cinema camera when recording in RAW. But with that said, right, when I rent this camera, I rent it when I need a C camera on set, right, in a controlled lighting situation. And in that instance, or even in moderate uncontrolled lighting, the dynamic range is fine. It's the dynamic range that would have blown us away to come out of a full frame mirrorless camera 3 or 4 years ago. But please, Canon R6 Mark III, C-Log 2, please and thank you. The other complaint that I feel like I should let you know about is the rolling shutter, because this camera has a good reputation for rolling shutter in video. And I think that stems from, if you go to, like, what is that site that ranks all the rolling shutter times, right? They do the lab tests on the cameras, right? According to that site, this camera's got a pretty good rolling shutter, but the caveat there is that it was tested in the 4K crop mode, and using the camera in the full frame mode, I don't find the rolling shutter to be like exceptional. It's, just a little less than okay, in fact. And on that site, the name of which I wish didn't escape me, but I will put on the screen, when we're assessing how cameras perform for video, right, basically the lab tests they perform are dynamic range and rolling shutter, and this camera doesn't have exceptional rolling shutter, and it doesn't even have, honestly, very good dynamic range. And so it's sort of, if there is something that it's not really good at, it's probably like high-end video work. I still feel like it's really good for lots and lots of video applications, but if you need something that's good at every video application, especially if you need something that has good dynamic range and good rolling shutter performance, right? That's the instance where you're probably going to be spending twice as much to get something 5% better. And we're used to that. That's technology. I should also say about the rolling shutter, something my wish list for an R6 Mark III, right, that so many other cameras, including like the Canon R7, get right, is that you can choose to not oversample the video to get longer recording times, longer battery life, and better rolling shutter. Whereas with the R6 and the R6 Mark II, you have to oversample the video all the time, and so you can never make a choice between having a more detailed video or a more motion accurate video. So those are the things I really wanted to make you aware of from my experience if you're considering choosing the R6 Mark II as a purchase for some purpose. This is a camera that fulfills on more promises for more purposes than certainly any Canon camera, but honestly more than most cameras generally from any brand that I'm aware of, and I highly recommend it. if you're one of those people like me who needs some of those more niche video capabilities, or a lot of them in a single camera, then I just wanted to let you know that this probably is going to be disappointed. If you're looking at this and saying, oh, it's a full frame camera, it's going to have a great improvement in dynamic range from my crop sensor camera or Super 35 camera, you're going to be disappointed. If you're looking at this and saying, oh, this shoots 40 frames per second stills, so it must have a really good rolling shutter performance, you're going to be disappointed. If you're not one of those people, you're going to find out that this is one of the most rock solid, reliable, enjoyable cameras that you can get for the 99, okay, 95, whatever % of other purposes there are. And I think the biggest problem with marketing this camera has been that it's just too perfect. There's nothing to complain about. There's nothing to make a big controversial hot takes video on. And I think you're going to love it if you want to give it a try. If you can't afford this, then maybe consider the lower priced R7 APS-C camera, or the entry-level full frame camera, the Canon EOS R8. You can watch review videos for those right here. Take this back to the rental house.